I want to make sure I've got this off. While I have this out, type in the words fired up, F-I-R-E-D-U-P, F-I-R-E-D-U-P, and text it to 95613. You do that and we will keep you in tune about how you can continue to fight what's going on in Washington, D.C. You know, Americans need to really... Now, here's what's happening. Let me just kind of put this in a little perspective. America's kind of emerging from a fog that it found itself in. I was a pilot in the United States Air Force for some years back in the early 70s, and one of the great and beautiful things was flying out of that fog and following those instruments and seeing that runway show up just like it was supposed to. That was a very comforting feeling. And America has been flying in a fog for too long. I tell people, I said, listen, Republicans got frustrated. They got frustrated because we elected men and women who said, you know, elect us and we're going to go to Washington, D.C. with an R behind our names. And they went to Washington, D.C. and we ended up couldn't tell the difference between whether they were Republicans or Democrats. That's what happened to the Republican Party. And look, we shouldn't be, we shouldn't sugarcoat it. We need to get about it and talk about it and identify men and women today who really understand what the Republican Party is all about. And I tell people, I said, governing's pretty simple, I think. Now, there's some people in Washington, D.C. that think they need to do a whole bunch more than what I think they need to be doing. But I'm pretty much about three things about a Republican and governing. A Republican needs to be about having a strong military. And let me tell you, one thing about it, we got that right. We have the finest young men and women defending our freedoms all around the world that we've ever had. Ever had. My father was part of that group that they call the Great Generation. But my friends, we have young men and women that are every bit as sacrificial, every bit as good, every bit as selfless as those that came back in the 30s and the 40s. Second thing government ought to do is, three things. Have a strong military, secure our borders, and deliver the mail on time. That's it. Those three things. 1 out of 3 is all we're getting right now, let me tell you, that's for sure. And until you can get those 3 right, how about leaving everything else alone? I want to get back and talk about Texas just a second if I can. And the reason I want to do that is because I think there is a great story to tell here. As you look across this country today, and part of my job is to make other governors uncomfortable. I mean, truly think about it. I believe in the 10th Amendment with all my heart. It is a powerful part of of that Constitution, that 10th Amendment. Because basically what it says is that the federal government was created to be an agent for the states, not the other way around. And the 10th Amendment says we ought to compete against each other. And those principles, those conservative Republican principles that have been put in place in the state of Texas have created a powerful economy there. And I think it goes without saying that in the state of Texas that we are at the epicenter. We are at the apex of, if you will, of the states when it comes to the economy. When you look at what we've created there, and I tell people, I said, listen, Ralph, I'm only a little old animal science major from the beloved Texas A&M. But I get it. I get it about the principles of governing. You do not have to be a PhD from Harvard in political science to understand the principles of governing. Number 1, do not spend all the money. Have a tax and a regulatory policy that are fair and predictable. Have a legal system that does not allow for oversuing. And then have an accountable public school system, which basically says to the job creators that this is a place that has a skilled workforce. Those are the four things. Have a tax structure that's fair, a predictable regulatory climate, a legal system that doesn't allow for oversuing, and an accountable public school system. Then get out of the way, government, and let the private sector do what the private sector does best. Create jobs, create wealth. That's how to do it. In 2003, we had a $10 billion shortfall in the state of Texas. Long story short, the first time since Reconstruction, from those of you outside of the southern states, that goes back to about the 1870s, we had in Texas, for the first time, all Republican leadership. Republican Speaker, Republican Lieutenant Governor, Republican Governor, Republican-dominated House and Senate. And we had a major issue with the resources coming in didn't meet the previous budget's level. We had to make hard decisions. They were calling for state income tax in some of the major media markets. We're talking about it's time for Texans to understand they've got to pass a personal income tax. We as Republicans said, you know what? We really believe that Ronald Reagan knew what he was talking about. We believe that Ronald Reagan's supply-side economics work. If you will cut the spending, the job creators will flourish. And that's exactly what we did. They were hard decisions. They were tough decisions. We are not the most popular people in the state of Texas. But that's okay. What we created in 2003 by putting those principles into play started a process that has today allowed Texas to stand without a doubt, irrefutably, as the #1 economy in America. There are more jobs created in the state of Texas in the last decade than any other state in the country. We are the #1 exporting state for the 8th year in a row.